Welcome again to another session we will share today with the history of the form we have been talking about and we know about Kathak, the great form from central, north and western India. In fact, it is the only classical form from this part of the country, since East and South India have lot of other forms. Kathak thus becomes the most important form for half of India. Katha kahe so Kathak kahaye is a well-known adage and dictum. It means one who recites Katha, stories of God, is a Kathakar. The word has two words conjoined to make one. Katha, akar means shape. Story plus shape is equal to Kathakar, Kathakar. It means developing a story. It means delivering a tale. It means reciting scriptures through music and meaning, developing it with hastas and dance. A woman storyteller was known as Kathika and male storyteller was called a Kathakar, also Kathaka or just Kathak. Stories from great epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Puranas and folklores were meant to keep culture alive. These storytellers used temple courtyards on festival nights, embellishing their stories with hand gestures, facial expressions accompanied by vocal music, instrumental music and percussion. The name of dance denotes the form of storytelling and offers a link to the Sanskrit term Kathaka or storyteller. The term Kathak, referring to a dance and to a caste of performers to storytelling, is a critical part of Kathak's identity. Referring to appearance of the word Kathaka in Sanskrit literature has formed the basis of the claims of Kathak's antiquity rather than attempts to connect the dance to ancient dance postures. The evidence in Nritta by Pandarika Vithala indicates that what became elements of Kathak choreography were part of court performances, but there is no sign of people called Kathaks or Kathak. The Kathakars were attached to certain temple in North India. Probably they recounted the story at first orally, but later on, in order to make interpretation more effective, they added mime and gesture to their recitation. Thus was evolved a simple form of expressional dance, and this dance provided the embryo for what later developed into Kathak. There are literary references from the 3rd and 4th century BC which refer to these Kathakars. There are two verses from the Mahabharata which also refer to them. With the king on the way to the forest were the Kathaks, pleasing to the eyes and ears as they sang and narrated sweetly, says Adi Parva. In the post-Christian era, there is reference to Kathak in the Harshacharitrata of Bana. By the 13th century, a definite style had emerged and soon technical features like mnemonic syllables and bowl developed. In the 15th-16th century, at the time of Bhakti movement, Ras Leelas had a tremendous impact on Kathak. The form of dance even made its way to the Kathavachaks who performed in temples. The art was handed down from one generation to the next generation in a hereditary manner as an oral tradition. This was prior to the advent of the Mughal dynasty in North India. With Mughal rule, these performing bards were banned from performing in temples and were made to serve in courts for entertainment. The Kathakars had to change with history, and it is in the Mughal courts that they developed a style for pure entertainment of the emperors. The evolution of Kathak as a distinct mode of dance came in the 15th and 16th centuries when the popularization of the Radha Krishna legend and the consequent emergence of the cult of Prem Bhakti or devotion through dance, a form of operatic play known as Ras Leela, came into existence. The Ras Leela tradition developed mostly in Braj, and the plays to a large extent took their inspiration from the rapturous effusions of inspired Braj poets like Surdas, Nandadas and Krishnadas. In course of time, the Ras Leela developed into a distinct form of folk theatre carrying a pleasing blend of song, narrative, acting and dancing. And the dancing in Rasa Leela consisted of, for most part, of an extension and amplification of the simple, basic mime and gesture of the Kathak storytellers combined with elements of whatever folk dancing was then available in the region. North India was invaded over the centuries by invaders from Central Persia since 2nd century BCE. But the time of Alexander the Great and the arrival of Muhammad Ghori and Ghazni in 10th and 11th centuries, Muslim rule started in parts of North India in the 13th century when the Delhi Sultanate was founded in 1206 AD by the Central Asian Turks. The slave dynasty was started by Qutbuddin Aibak, then Iltutmish, who was succeeded by his daughter Razia Sultan. Alauddin Khilji was the second and most powerful sultan of the Khilji dynasty. He ruled for about 20 years from 1296 to 1316. Amongst the numerous contributions of the Khilji dynasty, the great work of Persian poet and laureate Alauddin's court, Amir Khusro, is famous. Khusro contributed in the creation of new ragas, talas, new instruments, and laid the foundation of Hindustani music. The Delhi Sultanate ruled the major part of northern India in the early 14th century. The Lodi dynasty of Afghan Pashtun descent ruled from 1451 to 1526. In the 16th century, Mughals came from Central Asia and covered most of India gradually. Mughal kings Babur ended Ibrahim Lodi's reign. Except for Akbar, the other Mughal kings Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb were hardly interested in Indian art, and as a result of centuries of invasions and lootings, many local temples and traditions either did not survive or were submerged. The Mughal Empire suffered a gradual decline in the early 18th century, which provided opportunities for the Maratha Empire, Sikh Empire and Mysore Kingdom to exercise control over large areas in the subcontinent. In the very early days of Indian history, the best forms of dances were offered in the temples for the glory of God. In course of time, these were developed into a systematized and classical art form, a dynamic medium of self-expression and creation of aesthetic pleasures. Classical Kathak dance was also born and nursed in the temples the same way, but later flourished in princely courts. We learn a lot from the paintings commissioned by the Mughal court, namely the Akbarnama, Tarikh-e-Khandan-e-Timuriya. In these small or large size miniatures are the visual accounts of the daily and annual events in the palaces. In the paintings of Akbarnama and Tarikh-e-Khandani-e-Timurika, along the paintings of a slightly early period named the Tutinama, two distinct schools of dance are in evidence. One seems to draw its inspiration from Iran, or at least from the paintings relating to dance in Persian miniatures. Alongside are miniatures of dancers who quite obviously represent an indigenous school of dancing which must have been prevalent in the countryside and in native courts. Quite often in a single painting, there are two different groups of dancers. One of Akbar's generals had seized Mandu by defeating Baz Bahadur and Rupmati. Records tell us that as part of the loot, 350 dancers were brought to Akbar's court. Undoubtedly, some of these must have represented ancient traditions. In the course of time, they were rehabilitated, and perhaps it was this amalgam of the Persian and the Indian brought together in a court milieu which was responsible for the nascent beginning of a style of dance we recognize as Kathak. The greatness of Indian culture is its assimilation and absorption, which is why there was never a clash of civilizations as maintained by historians of and in West. But in India, an amalgamation, a merging, a meeting took place. Over centuries, several invaders came and conquered India politically but not culturally. It was the greatness of Indian civilization that even when a persecuted in Iran tribe of Parsis came to India on Gujarat coast first, when asked by the local ruler how their customs were not in way, the king said, "We are milk, you will mix like sugar in milk." Many instances abound of this meshing and mixing, and result being a fusion, not confusion. Hence were born poetry and literary traditions of Amir Khusro or Ras Khan in 12th century and kings like Wajid Ali Shah in 18th century. The art of Kathakar was a product of the times, a response to singing and dancing in praise of God. These were wandering minstrels who roamed from temple to temple, village to village in search of God and livelihood. Slowly, their art became structured within the temple system. As the space was small, small circular movement and lack of elaborate hand movements were drawn. Thus Kathak had no leaps or jumps but pirouettes and storytelling. Katha Vachana, with small natural gestures, performer could regale with stories of gods, kings and local legends. While this was very much the practice in central and west India, in south forms had developed over centuries, born out of many prevailing systems and traditions, again temple patronized. Despite regional variations, all schools subscribed to the basic principles of the Natya Shastra tradition. The dance continued to be divided into Natya and Nritta on the one hand and into Tandava and Lasya on the other. Although they continue to follow these broad principles, many distinctive regional styles evolved and each region ultimately developed a distinct vocabulary. This second fact led to the formulation of different classical styles in India. The beginning of the contemporary classical styles, be it Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri, Odissi or Kathak, can be traced back to developments in the medieval period, roughly dating from 1300 AD to 1800 AD. In content and theme, dance was conditioned by the growth of regional literary traditions, which in turn were influenced by shift in religious emphasis. The conquest of North India by the Muslim invaders gave a setback to the arts of music and dance from the 13th to the 15th centuries. This was the period when the Krishna cult was propagated in South India. There was a great revival of Vaishnavism in North India, led by revered Saint Vallabhaya in the 16th century. The efflorescence of music, poetry, dance and painting was inspired by devotion to Krishna. Kathakars grew in influence once the art of temple storytellers were patronized by kings and courts, and as each region had many, each place became an important point. Thus, each province or kingdom, say Jaipur or Lucknow or Banaras, became an important center of learning and performing thanks to patronage. A famous poet of the period, Kalidas, once wrote, "Creepers, plants and artists always need support." Thus, this came true especially of Indian classical dance forms which had temple patronage or patronage from wealthy nobles, kings or courts. Braj region, Mathura, Vrindavan and other such specific cult-related worshipping centers of Hinduism became important repositories of Kathak traditions. Thus, poetry was region-specific, hence in Braj it was Braj, in Awadh or Lucknow it was in Awadhi dialects. Interestingly, while Braj became epic center of Krishna Kathas for Hindu culture, Lucknow, being under Mughal rule, still supported Krishna lores thanks to enlightened kings like Wajid Ali Shah. Thus, Kathak united and connected all regions. The Kathakar arose in temples and in village India in Hindi heart belt. Various sects and dialects added to its own components, and this made the form have flavors of each major region and its cultural specificity. North India boasts of many folk and music traditions, but in classical dance, Kathak is common to all of North, West, and now East India. This art of storytelling made it possible to connect various regions and languages, kingdoms and empires. Over the years, Kathak and Kathakar became one. This was a synergetic meshing of music and dance, poetry and literature. In dance form, then, many gurus and gunijans in various courts came together to offer a structured form, later known as Kathak. The origins remained simply the art of storytelling. The origins were natural response to needs of society at a given point in time. The Kathakars of yore were the pioneers who devised a simple mode of communication that later became an important classical dance form of India and only representation of North and West India. When the Mughals invaded India in 15th century, they lured the storytellers with exotic gifts to perform for the royals. Hence, to suit the needs of the royalty, the Kathaks changed the simple dance style into an intricate mime composed of emotion-filled pieces of the Nritya and pure dance movements of the Nritta. This created two distinct branches of the dance, one that had more of Persian influence and the other that was the rustic temple style. The court style dance focused more on technique with rhythmic and complex footwork to please the eyes of the darbaris, with less emphasis on the emotion, while the temple version was more soul-rendering and emotional, conveying the mythological stories in a heartwarming way. The influence of Mughal did not affect the content, and soon Kathak evolved gaze, mannerisms, cultural moorings of the Muslim courts. The spillover was to be seen in compositions, courtly entries and parda or veil on head. The coming of courtesans also gave this art extension, and the brothels of certain cities became grooming schools for etiquette and high culture. During the British Raj, there was a sharp decline in popularity for the dance as it was banished as being vulgar and tabooed as the dance of the prostitutes. However, in the most independent era, the dance revived and full vigor to join the list of the 8 classical dances of India. With the advent of the Muslim rule, Kathak dance was taken from the temple to the court, and thenceforward it developed in two different milieus, one represented by the Hindu courts of Rajasthan, particularly the court of Jaipur, and the other by the Muslim courts of Delhi, Agra and Lucknow. Under court patronage, Kathak transformed itself into a highly technical and stylized art form for the delectation of the few. In both Hindu and Muslim courts, Kathak came to be regarded as a sophisticated form of entertainment, with the emphasis almost entirely on the solo performer. The environment of the North Indian Mughal courts caused a shift in focus for Kathak from a purely religious form to becoming a court entertainment. Dancers imported from Central Asia spread their ideas to Kathak dancers as they borrowed ideas from Kathak to implement in their own dance. Kathak absorbed the new input, adapting it until it became an integral part of its own vocabulary. Kathak began to shift away from other traditional Indian dances such as Bharatanatyam. The demi-plie stance of most other dance Indian forms gave way to straight legs taken from the Persian dancers. To emphasize the flamboyant and elaborate rhythmic footwork, as many as 150 ankle bells on each leg were worn. It was also during this period that the signature chakras, spins of Kathak were introduced, possibly influenced by the so-called whirling dervishes. The straight-legged position gave a new vitality to the footwork, which wove percussive rhythms in its own right, whether together with or in accompaniment of the tabla or pakhavaj. By this stage, the varied instrumentals and introduced great flexibility into Kathak in terms of presentation and narrative dance. As it moved away from the temple through folk dances to the court, it gathered many assertions of the themes on which the narrative dance could treat, resulting in a broader catchment of material for Abhinaya pieces, and a less stylized and slightly informal presentation style, which often incorporated improvisations and suggestions from the courtly audience. The fusion of cultures developed Kathak in a singular manner, but although it was by now substantially different from the other Indian dance forms, the roots of the style remained the same, and as such, it still displays a continuity with the others, particularly in the hand formations during storytelling and some of body postures, for example, the Tribhangi position, which is common to most Indian dance forms. Kathak may deal with the themes of the gods, but hardly ever do people associate it with identification with the One and Almighty Himself. The observation may or may not be correct, but it is true that a casual observer of this dance style is first and foremost struck by the highly stylized character of this dance style, a stylization which is neither in character as Bharatanatyam nor epic as Kathakali, but fundamentally urban and courtly. This is obvious in its love for virtuosity and an emphasis on sheer form and its complicated rhythmic patterns. Kathak became a surname as seen in 20th century teachers Kundanlal Kathak, Sundarlal Kathak. They did not use Gangani in official communication, and an invitation card of 1960s from Baroda University's dance department Maharaja Sayaji Rao University, headed by scholar Mohan Khokar then, was invited to traditional Gharana artists to join India's first university offering dance at graduate level, shows such surname being in practice.